I'm truly grateful to be here today and to share my research with this community. I'd like to begin with a question posed by ecosexual artist and activist Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens. What if we imagine the earth as our lover rather than simply as our mother, or as both? My research takes up this invitation by exploring the idea of the earth as a toxic lover or lover in a toxic relationship. Grounding this in the lineage of Black feminist thought, I turn to the concept of the erotic as a source of power and information to focus on interspecies desire and sexuality. This leads to my central question: how might interspecies eroticism reconfigure the concept of biophilia not as a stable love of life, but as a porous, metabolically entangled relation? By looking at these encounters in contemporary art, I ask how interspecies desire simultaneously resist and reproduce the colonial and capitalist forms of intimacy that shape our relations to the world around us. To explore this, I placed Jung's tridophilia and Jesvan's mother of pearl in conversation. I argue that modern understandings of the body are structured by what I call dry logic, a model that imagines bodies as bounded and separate from their environment. But as gender and disability studies scholar Mel Chen suggests, we are always already entangled. For Chen, exposure to chemicals is not just an external threat, it is a relational and affective condition that shapes bodies over time. In response, I propose Humid Sexuality and Hormonal Ecology as a framework for understanding how contemporary art navigates this exposure. Humid Sexuality names the felt condition of our entanglement within an already permeable state shaped by the stickiness and saturation of air. Meanwhile, Hormonal Ecology describes the material processes through which that entanglement actually unfolds. Together, they offer a way to rethink intimacy beyond the logic of control. With this context in mind, I now turn to the work of Jung, a Hong Kong-based artist whose practice centers on intimate multi-species relations. To ground us in this sensorial world, I'd like to show a short excerpt from his ongoing project, Tridophilia. Jung's Tridophilia includes 5 videos produced between 2016 and 2021. The title Tridophilia combines tridophi, the scientific name for fun, with philia, meaning love or attraction. Filmed in the dense forest of Taiwan, the series stages erotic encounters between queer male figures and local fans. The camera lingers on a shared multi-species choreography. We see men gently caress fern leaves, rub them across their faces, lie down and press against the foliage. There is no climax, yet the sensuality is palpable. This shared sensing allows us to rethink biophilia. Most of us know this term through biologist E.O. Wilson, who described it as a genetic innate tendency to love nature. But there is a risk in this definition. It treats our relationship with the world as a pre-programmed biological script. Historian of science Michael Petit critiques this as the granular self. It is a view where our very ethics are reduced to invisible chemical secretions. This is the heart of dry logic, a model that pretends the human is a separate, bounded entity. To move away from this, I suggest that we are saturated. In other words, our bodies are looking into nature, just as we see in Jung's work. But this saturation is not always peaceful. In chapter 2, one of the most intense scenes unfolds. A man carries the curved tip of one leaf, rubbing his body against it. He moans softly, engaged in a slow sensual encounter with the plant. Then the mood shifts. He begins to eat the fern. He tears it apart, chews loudly, while still moaning. This blending of pleasure and destruction is Jung's way of flipping the ethical frame. He asked, "Did you ask the plants when you ate them for lunch today?" We normalize the consumption of plants, yet we pathologize erotic intimacy with them as unnatural. Jung continues this disruption in chapter 3 by bringing BDSM practitioners into forest. This is not about dominance, but about a careful, queer practice of touch and responsiveness. It resists the safe and reproductive sexualities that biophilia often demands, forcing us to ask, how do we practice consent in an asymmetrical, multi-species world? This tension between care and violence, between consumption and desire, is where I locate humid sexuality. This concept emerges from my own embodied memory of the saturated environments of Taiwan and Hong Kong. In these places, the air and sensation gather to blur the boundary between the body and the atmosphere, creating a condition that is always slightly wet. As you can see on this slide, my working concept is informed by a constellation of thinkers who prioritize porosity and relation. I use humid sexuality to name the felt condition of disentanglement, the stickiness of an inescapable saturation. Humid sexuality names a mode of interspecies desire and sexuality grounded in permeability, where bodies are drawn into contact through saturation and slow accumulation and are transformed through that entanglement. Again, if humid sexuality is the felt condition of disentanglement, then hormonal ecology is the material framework. It describes the invisible yet crucial chemical flows that circulate between these men and these funds. We are moving away from the dry logic of the bounded body to a wet ethics of metabolic saturation. Ultimately, Jung reveals that funds are not passive biological specimens, but active agents of desire. By letting the forest choreograph the scene, Jung shows that funds themselves are inherently queer. They reproduce through spores and possess complex, non-binary reproductive cycles, with many species capable of shifting sex in response to their environment. To recognize their queerness is a colonial act as well. Historically, in Taiwan, these plants were marginalized within colonial extractive frameworks as mere data points. Jung challenges this erasure by recentering them as vegetal kin. In this way, acknowledging the sexuality of plant challenges the dry logic of heteronormativity, the rigid colonial assumption that nature must follow human scripts of binary gender and reproductive utility. But while these funds are often undervalued, the next work turns to organism that is overvalued, fetishized, and made into symbol of imperial fantasy, the oyster. Jess Fan is an interdisciplinary artist whose work involves biological materials to examine how race, gender, and identity are materially produced. In Mother of Pearl, Jess Fan works with the Aquia oyster, a species native to Hong Kong. Fan implants small sculptural Chinese characters directly into oyster's gonad. These characters spell out Pearl of the Orient, a colonial and Anglo-imperial moniker for Hong Kong. This act of naming is a literal intrusion. It triggers the oyster's natural defense mechanism. It secretes layers of nacre to coat the irritation and form a jewel. This process is slow and internal. It unfolds as accumulation over time. In this sense, the colonial inscription functions like the toxic lover I mentioned at the beginning. An intrusion the body cannot simply reject, but must metabolize and incorporate. Here, sexuality emerges through the oyster's material process of contact and transformation. It is about how bodies take in what enters them and are reshaped through that encounter. It involves acknowledging the initial violence of the colonial inscription while also recognizing the potential for resilience. This is hormonal ecology in action. The oyster is not just reacting, it is metabolizing the colonial wound. The trauma of the name is not erased, it is coded in shimmering nacre, becoming a permanent material part of the body's new identity. By way of closing, I return to the condition of humidity. In the works of Jung and Fan, we see that desire is not a discrete or contractual act. It is an ongoing process of saturation that draws bodies into transformation where consent must be continuously negotiated. Through the lens of hormonal ecology, we see that we are never truly autonomous individuals. Instead, we are always being reshaped by the imperceptible metabolic transformation occurring between our bodies and our environments. To answer my opening question, interspecies eroticism reconfigures biophilia not as a stable love of nature, but as a deep eco-erotic entanglement. These encounters resist the dry colonial script of regulation, even as they must navigate the sticky remnants of capitalist intimacy. To embrace humidity is to accept that our bodies are porous and that our ethics must be relational rather than regulated. By embracing the wetness of these encounters, we begin to challenge the epistemologies that privilege dryness. Thank you.